How to cut expansion joints into the grout joints. Cutting expansion joints into the grout joints is done in an effort to provide a point to absorb the movement of contraction and expansion of the building materials and minor movement that occurs throughout the day, seasons, and years. We have already discussed that on its own, intermittent control joints are not suitable for absorbing the continuous and ongoing movement that occurs with timber frame substrates, preventing tiles from popping or becoming drummy. At the on-site inspection, check for expansion joints. If none are found on a timber frame balcony, even though you know that you will be installing on-top expansion joints, still cut them in. The substrate needs to be in good working order to maintain the membrane's effectiveness. With concrete substrates, the movement is significantly less, so cutting an expansion joint seems to be enough. No on-top expansion joints required. Where to install expansion joints? Firstly, identify where the best place for the expansion joint is. If you have a crack from one side of the balcony to the other, then this is ideal location as you can already identify movement and place for the expansion joint. Then locations of secondary areas is where there is missing grout. Missing grout occurs due to movement and no other reason. During the high pressure cleaning process, any loose grout will most likely be removed, making it easier to identify. How to install an expansion joint. Our recommendation for installing an expansion joint is to use a battery-powered grinder. Lead-powered grinders are more powerful and more likely to kick, as it was, and pull the grinder across the surface of the tile, damaging it. Battery-operated grinders have less power and more control, making the process more enjoyable and effortless. Using a battery-operated grinder, position your body directly behind the grinder, giving you enough power to control the process. For larger grout joints, like what might be found on terracotta tiles, put the grinder through the grout down one side and then the other, using a bolster and hammer to remove the center. And with much smaller joints, go into the middle and slightly moving the blade from side to side. Ideally, the blade would go through the grout and the screed, but you won't have the ability to make a cut this deep, so focus on cleaning out the grout joint completely. Keep in mind, if they waterproofed on top of the screed, you will most likely be damaging the failed membrane below in new areas, so be sure to install the expansion joint correctly to prevent it pulling away from the side and allowing moisture to gain access. The main issue that occurs when tradesmen install expansion joints is they try to fill the void, which removes any lateral flexibility of the caulking. The thickness of the caulking should be at least half the size of the gap it's filling to make sure there is lateral flexibility, otherwise you will only receive lengthways flex. Then when movement occurs, it removes the adhesion of the expansion joint on the side, creating a void. Insert backing rod of appropriate size into the void. Be sure to check that it's not sitting too high, and you may need to push it down or cut it down a little in some places so it's not seen after completion. Then tape the section in one direction so that it will come off together when you're ready to remove the tape, creating less mess as the caulking is harder to remove than normal silicone. At least 1 or 2 mil on either side to allow for good adhesion to the tile and not just the edge of the tile. In smaller joints, usually which come with larger tiles that are about 2 mil, you probably won't have room for backing rod, but because you are installing it over the tiles with the gap on each side, that will prevent the caulking from going too deep, and you will leave it on the top and literally push it in with a spoon as you go over it. Using a spray bottle with a little clear dishwashing liquid, spray the caulking and take off with a spoon, ice cream stick or caulking tool and remove the tape for good finish. All recommended caulking is neutral cure and can have the membrane applied immediately after application. No cure time required.